adolescent adulthood and elderhood. Welcome to Beyondhood, where we go beyond elderhood, one chat at a time.
Announcement! Drum roll! After listening to your feedback, we will release a new episode every other Thursday from now on, which means twice a month instead of once a month. Don't forget to subscribe to Beyondhood where you listen to podcasts so you don't miss out on our release. Or even better, you can go to our website and subscribe so you can receive our complimentary VIP newsletter every other Thursday as well. Before we start, do you have one or all three of the following issues? First, do you want to know more and deeper into your loved one's childhood? Second, do you feel it is hard for you to talk to your loved one to understand them more deeply? They're often not as open with you because you're family or good friends. Or you find it hard to ask them questions because you're close to them. Third, have you thought of one day when they are gone, you can never ask them about their lives anymore? If any of the above comes to mind, our Record Life Story service is your solution. Listen to this episode and see how we can weave a story for your loved one and create this legacy for you and your loved ones. Contact me. My contact info is in the show notes. In today's episode, I have the pleasure of recording Liz's life story for her. I met Liz through episode 1 client Donald. Liz is an honest, funny, and fiery woman. She's such a free spirit. I couldn't stop giggling throughout the recording, and she has hands down the most unique upbringing you will hear. I'm so excited to share this episode with you. Welcome to the Beyondhood podcast. First, Liz, welcome. Can you share with us your full name, how old are you, and where do you live?
My name is Elizabeth Bolton. I'm known as Liz or Lizzie, depending who I'm talking to. I was born in 1948, so I'm 75, and I live in northwest London, Kensal Green.
Nice. We will start off with your childhood. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in El Fasher in Darfur, which is part of Sudan. Sudan was all one country there then, in those days, but nowadays it's South Sudan and Sudan. And I understand it's been totally devastated during the war. So we spent the first few years of my life there.
I researched on the brief history of Sudan on Britannica.com, the same company that owned Merriam-Webster, because I want to make sure my facts are correct for you. Sudan was called Anglo-Egyptian Sudan from 1922 to 1956. It gained independence from the United Kingdom and Egypt in 1956. After gaining independence, there was a costly and divisive civil war between the North and the South. Finally, in 2005, there was a comprehensive peace agreement ended the warfare. It also granted Southern Sudan a status and stipulated a referendum on independence from the South. The result of the vote, which held it in January 2011, were overwhelmingly in favor of independence, and South Sudan was then declared an independent country in 2011. And hence, Liz was saying that now it's two countries. Where did you move after?
I've gone through my birth book and to get the dates and everything correct. I think we came back to England and then went to Biarritz for 6 months while my father searched for another job. And it was just my mother and we three girls who were in Biarritz. And then we moved to Ghana, where my younger sister was born. And that was then called the Gold Coast, but is now called Ghana.
According to the Embassy of Ghana, Ghana used to be called the Gold Coast. It was a name given it by early Portuguese explorer who first set foot on the shore of the country in the 15th century. The name Gold Coast is because there was a large resources of gold in the area. During different period from the time the Portuguese discovered gold in 1471 to independence in 1957, there were different monarchy of European kingdom, but the British came in dominance. Hence, the Gold Coast was a British colony until it gained independence on March 6, 1957. Then the name has changed to Ghana. Wow, so how did you end up being born and grew up in Darfur and Sudan?
My father was with the Public Works Department, building the roads and waterworks there. And then he started his own consultancy later in life. But at that time, he had been with the Public Works Department in Singapore and before the war, somehow ended up in Sudan.
What was it like growing up in Sudan and Ghana as a child?
I think all memories of childhood are influenced by the photographs and by the images that you've been shown. We actually even had black and white films that my father took of us during those days. So I'm not quite sure what's memory and what's imposed on my memory by the films and the photographs. But I do remember being part of a 3-girl gang and climbing out a 4-girl clan by then, because I had 2 older sisters, and climbing out of windows and across the flat roofs. And I remember too that I had malaria, which my parents thought was yellow fever. And that took about 3 weeks. And I do remember getting out of bed and my legs buckling underneath me because I hadn't walked for so long.
Oh, wow. What was treatment like there? Was it in Sudan or in Ghana when you had malaria?
I think it must have been in Ghana because I was walking then. And I don't know about treatment. I can only tell from my birth book where my mother wrote that she was frightened and I was terribly ill. And I presume, however they treated malaria, it was quite common, known how to treat it.
So you had a birth book?
Yes, my mother made us each a birth book, and that's where the information that you wanted is, in somewhere where this book is.
What did she make? How old until you got?
Yes, she put in photographs of us as newborn babies and then of us as children together. But she wrote pages and pages about being called to the hospital and what the hospital was like, because I was the first British baby born there. So it must have been, she was supposed to catch a plane and go to Aden, I think, to have me, but she refused to go. And that's why I ended up being the first British baby in Darfur. In El Fasher.
That is so cool. How many people can say that they're the first British to be born in a foreign country? Give her a round of applause. You were already a very international traveler as a kid in the 50s already. And you briefly mentioned what your parents do. How many siblings do you have?
I have an older half-sister. Her father died before he was a pilot in the Second World War, and he was killed before she was born. My mother was pregnant then with her, and she married my father very soon afterwards. So she's my half-sister, but we always considered her a full sister because she never knew her father and she only knew my parents. And then I have my sister who's closest to me, who's 11 months older than me, who was born in Juba. And then Katie, who is 3 years younger than me, and she was born in Ghana. And then I've got a younger brother, or we all have a younger brother. So there are 5 of us.
Oh, wow. Your dad was trained as a civil engineer, and then he worked as a civil servant in Darfur. What happened when you guys moved to Virginia and then moved back to England?
When we left Africa, we moved to the United States, where the three elder children went to school for a year or so. And that was during the McCarthy era.
McCarthy era was a name given to the period of time in American history that saw U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin produce a series of investigations and hearings during the 1950s in an effort to expose supposed communist infiltration of various areas of the U.S. government.
So my parents were very unhappy about the politics that were going. It was when they were expelling anybody who had any communist association, or stopping them working. And although my parents weren't communists, they had been as youngsters, but they were very disturbed by the politics in America. So we left quite soon after we'd been there, maybe 18 months. And by then my father was working for the World Bank. We moved back to England when I think I was 7. My father then started his own consultancy and moved to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, where my younger brother was conceived. My mother would join my father for maybe 6 months of the year. He would be away for 9 to 11 months every year.
Oh, wow.
And she would join him for 6 to 8 months and leave the 3 eldest children behind at home in Bray, which is in Berkshire, where we had a house, and they would invite families with their own children to move into our home to look after us rather than sending us to boarding school. So they kept all 3 of us together, and then we had numerous families, I think 7 in total, different families came and moved in with us. The first family had 2 children who we still know, the Clifton Moggs. They were contemporaries of ours. And then the next family was a widow with 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. So there were always a gang of us. There were always at least 3 of us, and usually around 5 or 6 of us.
Wow, so you had the original Airbnb in that people move into your home and live with you and also kind of take care of you guys at the same time. How do you feel about that?
I was very excited about it because I was quite an independent child. I loved all these different people, and I was quite an extrovert child. My sister, who's a bit older than me, was a very nervous child and was quite introverted. I think my elder sister found it the most difficult. But no, I enjoyed it. I thought it was great fun.
Yeah. What was your favorite memory at the house?
A couple of things. One, we would all sleep in one huge bedroom. So sometimes there would be 5 of us, or sometimes there'd be 6 of us, all sleeping in almost a dormitory. And we would put up washing lines across the room to divide the room into sections like a hospital, and put sheets over the washing lines so that we had our own little private spaces. And the sister, who was older than me, was such a nervous little girl that she used to climb into bed. She used to come into my little cubicle and climb into bed with me because she didn't like being in her own private section. Yeah, that was great fun. Being part of a gang of children.
Yeah.
I mean, we were quite well known in the neighbourhood because we had American accents, and it was quite unusual for people to have Americans, basically. And we had a huge American station wagon, a Pontiac, that they brought over on the ship with them. So we always stood out as a family, and also because our parents weren't there, which seemed even more unusual to sort of English people who were middle class and had been brought up very sensibly. It seemed quite, I suppose, outrageous to them.
Yeah, even let's say if you put it in nowadays, having children at the home, not with the parent, is still not very common. Thinking back into the 50s, I want to understand more about your parents. Your parents were already very globalized in the 40, 50, and 60 already. What was their story? How did they meet?
That's a very long and involved story. They met before the war, and then my father left England and moved to Singapore with the Public Works Department as a civil engineer. And my mother remained, she was in Scotland and in London. And while he was away, they communicated, they wrote to each other every week practically. I have all of their letters, they're fantastic. Because they're so beautifully written and they're long. They're like 5 or 6 pages long.
Wow.
And my father was having a wonderful time in Singapore. And my mother, the war started very soon in Europe, started very soon after he left, because he left at the beginning of 1939.
Side note, when we say war, we mean the Second World War.
So my mother joined the Women's Army, which she loved because of the uniform.
Oh.
And she was very, very pretty, very beautiful.
If you want to see a picture of Liz's mom, she was very beautiful. It is on our website, www.beyondhood.com.
And they kept on writing to each other, and then she met somebody else and she married him. He was an RAF pilot.
Side note, RAF stands for Royal Air Force.
Very good-looking Welshman. And she fell madly in love with him. He was a year younger than her. Very sadly, while she was pregnant in 1945, 3 weeks before the end of the war, he was shot down and killed. My father returned the following year from Singapore en route to America, where he had a fiancée. And 6 days after he returned to England, he and my mother got married.
Wow, your parents' love story are like dramatic. And I recall you mentioned you were organizing the letters to make a book.
Yes, I've written a book based on their letters and based on my mother's diaries and the letters that her first husband wrote to her because he was based in Eindhoven in Holland with the Air Force. And I have all of his letters and his logbook and the RAF logbooks. So yes, it makes a fascinating story.
Wow. What do you feel of your parents when they were not here with you and with your brother in Ethiopia? How do you feel about that?
I think I never really forgave my mother for leaving us. I became very independent of her, and I think I always resented it through my adulthood, really. And I felt she didn't have the right to tell me how to behave or what to do, because she'd lost that right when she had left us behind. I wasn't unhappy, but I definitely missed her. I absolutely adored my father, and he was forgiven totally for having been abroad. I think we all forgave. We thought it was quite natural, for him to be away. But I don't think we did miss my mother very much.
Interesting you said that. I think it's always... That's why people say daughters are mostly daddy's girl, and it's easier to forgive the dad somehow.
Yes, I do. No, I agree with you.
Well, we had quite a good understanding and interesting story from your childhood. We're moving into adolescence. I remember you mentioned you lived in the house until you were 16, and then you left home around 17. What was the house to you as an adolescent, and did you enjoy school?
Oh, I hated school, absolutely hated school, and very rebellious, and I didn't enjoy school at all. And the way that we were at a convent after having spent a year at a very small local school where I couldn't read or write, and when we moved to the convent, I was put in a class below my year. And then as a teenager, when I rebelled by holding a strike during our sewing class, the nuns put me down a class, so they educationally deprived me rather than expel me, because my parents were abroad and they felt they couldn't expel me. So they put me down a class, and then they humiliated me by when they called out your position in the class, where you had to walk in front of the whole school And if you were number one, you walked it up and you were number one in the class. But they put me upper class for the position, so I came last. So I had to walk up in front of the whole school and show that I was last, even though I hadn't taken half of the exams that the year above had taken.
Oh, wow.
Humiliating. It made me very angry indeed, so I couldn't wait to leave school.
Since you had a strike, the sewing class, do you know how to sew right now?
I'm a very good sewer. Yes, even as children, we used to sew our clothes, our own clothes. I actually think my mother made us sew some of our school uniform. But I used to sew the dresses that if I was going out on a Saturday night to a party, I would stitch together a dress and wear that.
Oh, wow. Then how come you don't like sewing class?
It was so boring. We had to measure everything perfectly and do everything slowly, and it was just boring because I could do it.
Oh, I see. Well, the lesson is that you don't really have to learn everything in school.
Exactly.
When you were a teenager, what was your favorite movie?
Oh, we loved, even as children, but particularly as teenagers, Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, all of their musicals. They're so romantic and so beautiful, and we just loved them.
Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, they were dance partner, and they feature in a total of 10 movies. Fred Astaire is regarded by many as the greatest popular music dancer of all time, and he's usually remembered for his pairing with Ginger Rogers, who was in several movies with him, including Swing Time in 1936. Oh, when did you first see it? Was it in a theater or how did it work when you were a teenager?
On TV.
Ah, on TV. And do you still love it? Do you still watch it?
Yes, occasionally I will watch. I love seeing clips of them on YouTube. I'll still play clips from time to time, or my sisters will send me clips to say, "Do you remember this?"
Oh. And what was the most important historical event that you remember when you were a teenager?
I do remember the assassination of President Kennedy, and I think anybody of my age remembers that day and remembers when it happened. It was so shocking. He was such a poster boy for America and all things American, and then to find he'd been shot and killed, and it was a news flash on TV, and us girls were watching TV. It must have been in the afternoon, so I don't know why we were watching in the afternoon, but I remember running into the kitchen and telling my mother to say, Mummy, President Kennedy's been shot. Yeah, no, it was very shocking.
He was shot in 1963, so you were around 15 that year.
So I left school at 15, 16. I think I was just 16, and went to Reading Technical College to take my A-levels. Yeah. And I took those in a year. Hardly ever went there. I fell in love with some engineers who were there. And I got English A-level in just the 1 year. And as soon as I'd finished there, my parents sent me on a secretarial course, which I did for 3 months. I did a high-speed secretarial course, a pitman's course. Got a job straight away and moved to London. So when I was 17.
Once you moved to London, what did you first came to London to do, and what was your career? Can you share with us?
Yes, one of my sister's friends, her boyfriend said to me, "You would be good in public relations," and he worked in advertising, and I was very in awe of him, and I had no idea what public relations was, so I joined a public relations company as a secretary. It was the division of an advertising agency.
Well, so what was public relation mean back then?
It was publicity for clients. So we worked on Littlewood's chain stores, Littlewood's pools, Phillips Electrical, Antler luggage. We organised at-home evenings for women. We sent anything that appeared in the newspapers or magazines. We supplied them with the product to photograph and to write about. and we generated news for them.
I see. You were working at your first advertisement agency, and then what happened? Did you stay there for long, or what's next for you?
I was there for 6 years, but I fell in love with the chairman of the agency, Colin, and we had an affair. He was a married man at the time with 2 adopted children. He was a playboy, so it wasn't just me. And he was 16 years older than me, so he was a grown-up and I was still very young. So I can be forgiven. And then I got pregnant, and I decided, it was without discussion with him, I decided I was going to have keep the baby. I didn't even have second thoughts about it. And so I was asked to leave the agency when it became obvious that I was pregnant. They felt it was inappropriate for the chairman to have one of the young girls in the agency pregnant by him. So I left the agency and I joined Courtaulds, which is was a huge textile division.
Fun fact, I did some Googling on Courtaulds. Courtaulds was a UK-based manufacturer of fabric, clothing, and chemical. It was established in 1794 and became the world's leading man-made fiber production company. Before, it was broken up into 2 companies, Courtaulds focusing on the chemical and Courtauld Textile focusing on the clothing in 1990s. Since the 1990s, it went through different acquisition, and now eventually it ends up the Courtauld Textile Company was bought by a Hong Kong private company in 2006.
I ran the homeware department, which was Antico floor tiles, Christie towels, sundial fabrics, any textiles to do with the home, Courtaulds made. And I worked there as a freelance until Katie was born, my daughter. And then I went back and worked for them for a little while, but not for long.
Did you become a single mom then?
Not immediately. I lived with Colin for a while, and then I fell in love with somebody else who looked just like Colin but much younger. And so I actually left home with Katie, with my daughter, when she was 15 months, and I moved in with my sister temporarily until Colin left our home together. And then he left, and yes, I did become a single mum because he didn't forgive me for having left him and really ruined his marriage, I suppose. His marriage was pretty much on the rocks anyway. It wasn't just me.
Yeah.
I keep saying that.
I'm
sticking with that, yes.
You went back to Courtauld for a little bit. I know that you started your own company, but how did you start your own company with your daughter around as well?
Yeah, I started a PR stylish company. When I say company, it was myself and another girl, and we had offices. I took offices above Ronnie Scott's in Frith Street, and I did the styling for some Littlewood catalogue. I had a golfing company. I think I had 3 or 4 clients. Wasn't very devoted to it. I decided when Katie was 3, I think, that I really needed a break. I'd gone back to work too soon after she'd been born. And I'd been on holiday to a place called Lindos in Greece. And I thought, I'm going to move there. I like that. I'm going to move there. So I rented out my flat. It transpired to a group of hookers, which I didn't know. I didn't know until I was recalled by the church commission who owned the flat. That paid the rent on the flat and gave me a very small income. So when I was in Lindos in Greece, which was sort of quite a hippie little village because there were no cars around, it was just donkeys were the main form of transport. But people like the Pink Floyd were there. Michael Gambon used to come on holiday. Quite a few of the big designers would come there.
For those of you who don't know, in the 1970s, Lindos, which is a village in Rhodes, Greece, was a hippie town where Pink Floyd, which is a rock band, member David Gilmour and Rick Wright and his wife Juliet Wright had houses and spent a lot of time there at the time of their first international album success.
It was a sort of I suppose it was the Saint-Tropez of Greece. It wasn't expensive and it was completely out of the way, which I didn't know when I decided I was going to go and live there.
You moved there, you have a little income from the rental, but then what do you do there?
Yes, I became a domestic hygienist, which is another way for saying I was a cleaning lady. I would clean for the tourists or wash there was one man who made me wash his suits. But I also worked for an artist called Polly Hope, whose work is quite internationally known.
I did some research on Polly Hope. Polly was a British artist, designer, and author. She created artwork in a variety of mediums, including painting, portrait, sculpture, textile, and ceramics. You can find more of her artworks in the permanent collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London.
I would sew things like sequins on her wall hangings. She made these beautiful pictures out of quilted wall hangings, and I was one of her workers. And she let me live in her studio during the winter when she left.
So how long did you live in this island in Greece?
On and off for 2 years.
And then what made you move back?
One, I had to retrieve my flat from the hookers, and two, it was time for Katie to go to school. So I had to reorganise where I was living and put Katie into a primary school, because by then she was 4, nearly 5.
Got you. So when you moved back, did you move back to PR agency or did you do something else then when you come back to England?
First came back, I worked for a doctor called Dr. John Goldman, who was a professor of haematology, and he was the one who brought host versus graft disease, or graft versus host disease, which is not a cure for leukemia, but it's a blood transfer for leukemia that's still used today. And he was exactly 10 years older than me to the day. We were both born on the same day, but 10 years apart. And so he became a lover. I had a very close relationship with him, and then I was offered a job back in PR. So I joined a PR agency again. With Perrier, yes. Perrier Water was one of our clients. I had an affair with the chairman. And we started, he actually died diving. We started the Perrier Pick of the Fringe, which was the first one ever. And I was up in Scotland for 3 weeks during the Fringe, going to see all of the productions with Alistair Moffat, who was the Fringe organiser. The Cambridge Footlights won that year, and that was Emma Thompson, Stephen Fry, Hugh Laurie, very, very entitled, established young people who put on a fantastic production. And their prize was that their production would be brought down to London and put on at the Donmar Theatre. And so that was really the beginning of their careers in the theatre.
In 1981, Liz worked for the PR behind the PRL, the Sparkling Water Pick of the Fringe. The original award was created by PRL in 1981 as a way of supporting young talent. Before this, there had been no award recognition for comedy shows on the Fringe. How did you come up with this Pick the Fringe as a PR thing?
It was the agency and myself that I worked with. We had to, when we were pitching for the Perrier business, we had to come up with a whole lot of ideas to associate the water with upmarket or innovative or sparkling events. Because it was a sparkling water.
And it's a sparkling event that triggered this.
Exactly.
I see. It still exists nowadays.
Pick of the Fringe. Yeah, exactly. Because Perrier no longer sponsor it.
From then, I know that you moved on to do more marketing communication. And what did you do then?
I joined Levi Strauss in London.
Levi Strauss is an American clothing company that is known worldwide for its Levi's brand of denim jeans.
It was quite a small group of people in Wembley. And it was great fun. I worked as the marketing and communications manager for Northern Europe. Sounds grander than it actually was. But I was in charge of all of the sponsorship, and we did the first ever music sponsorships. And that was Elvis Costello, David Bowie, Roxy Music, Ultravox. Those happened when I was there, and then they went on to do, I think Sting was the next one, but I wasn't there by then. No, that was great fun. I went on tour with David Bowie, I went on tour with Roxy Music, had an amazing time.
What was David Bowie like?
I didn't really get to know him. I think he probably said hello to me or passed me by a few times. He was very aloof. He was very distant. I think he felt that sponsorship was beneath him, but happy to take the money.
Was sponsorship a big thing back then? Like sponsor big event in order to get your names out there?
No, this was in 1980, I think, or 81, maybe 82. No, it was we really were the first people to sponsor music. But it was because of the Jeans Association, so young, hip music, the whole thing sort of gelled.
Oh, so because, Levi's, Gene Young, so it's like sponsor music. Right. Did you stay in Levi's for a while? Or I know that you moved to SF for a little bit. How was Levi's in SF?
I hated San Francisco because it was a very divisive community there. There was a huge gay community. It was the start of AIDS. There was a huge gay community. There was a big community of original San Franciscans, so old family, old money. And they really didn't mix with the newcomers who came in. It was a very divisive community, I felt. Beautiful place, but not a very nice place to live. My daughter didn't come to America with me, which is another reason why I returned to England. She was at boarding school and she didn't want to leave England and join me, but she did come over in the holidays, which is another reason why I was unhappy in San Francisco.
And you came back to London after a year. Then what did you do?
Then I started on my own. I started a consultancy and I did some work for Levi's. I had Thresher wine merchants who had something like 200 wine merchants over England. So I did their PR, quite a few clients, and I had a couple of girls who worked with me. But I was running that from my home. End of the 1990s, one of the girls who was working for me, Julia, who was a fantastic girl, said to me, "You've got to start a proper company. You can't just be, Liz Bolton consultancy." So I started Red Hot PR and we took offices in Bell Street, just off the Edgware Road, which I shared with another friend who ran a advertising marketing company. Yeah, I think we had 6, 8, 10 clients and there were 5 of us working. And in between that, though, I had another child.
Yes.
Which I've forgotten about.
We will come to that in a little bit. But before, in 1992, why did you start your own company and how did you find it working for yourself? Because as a woman, you were taking care of a child and then you were working and then you started a company. Even nowadays, we're getting into an era that more and more women starting their own company. But in the 90s, it's still less than men. So what motivated you to start and how did you find working for yourself like?
Her being at boarding school enabled me to have the time to work. I mean, although it was financially crippling, I had to work very hard in order to pay for the boarding school in order to work. So it was sort of catch-22. It never occurred to me not to be working with the child. I didn't have the option because I wasn't financially supported by her father at all. I paid for all of her schooling and her education. Although he did contribute for a number of years towards her education, I have to say that. Didn't pay for it all, but he did contribute towards it. And my son was born in 89, but it just meant that I had to continue working. And it was actually not a matter of choice, it was a matter of necessity. To start my own company was no different than being a consultant. It just meant I had headed paper in offices, as opposed to, producing your own headed paper on a computer.
Do you enjoy working for yourself, or how does it compare with working for a corporate?
I much prefer being my own boss, but running a company is, and I think Donald mentioned this as well.
Liz listened to episode 1 from Donald. If you haven't listened, go back to our episode 1 to listen Donald's story.
You don't actually do what you're particularly good at, which is PR. You end up dealing with staff and organising the office and making sure the bills are paid and dealing with your clients rather than dealing with the press. So no, it was very stressful and you never stop. You are on call 24 hours. And so even when you're in bed, you're thinking about, oh, I did that wrong, or tomorrow I've got to do such and such. You never stop thinking about it.
Kind of the beauty, but also the downside of it. You own everything, but you also are responsible for most of the things in the company.
Yeah, including the people you employ. Because if you go down, they go down. So you have a responsibility to them as well.
Yes, when you were working for your own company, who was the most memorable client that you had, or an incident at work that happened?
That was something else we did at Levi's, was we sponsored St Martin's School of Art, the fashion department. It was the first sponsorship that St Martin's ever did as well. I worked with the Royal College quite a lot, did a lot of sponsorships with them, which was great fun. For a luggage company, we got the students there to design the luggage which went in window displays in Selfridges. I did Mimco, which is an Australian brand of handbags and luggage as well, and that was quite well known. We mostly specialised in accessories, fashion accessories, rather than in fashion brands as such. We did From Somewhere, which was the first recycling of clothes. A lovely Italian lady who worked with Colin Firth's wife in the sort of green economy, and she recycled cashmere, so she would cut up cashmere sweaters and sew them up together again. It was called From Somewhere, and she got very well known during London Fashion Week.
How did you work with her? So you help her to peel out the recycled cashmere?
Yes, I mean, Artwork, which is a knitwear company, was one of our clients. And the sort of thing we would do was, I'll give you an example with Artwork. Artwork was run by a husband and wife team, and the wife was the designer and the husband ran the company. So in order to get them publicity, they did beautiful cotton knitted knitwear that was known as a designer brand. I would get profiles in the magazines and newspapers about them as a couple. So that was a different way of publicising the company, was to use them as a working couple who ran a company as the face of the company. So they became quite well known. And then the fashion editors would call in the knitwear for fashion shoots, and we would take samples over to Vogue and show them the newest collections. Yeah, so we would get the products. It's more product publicity than pure PR, but we would get the people, the publicity as well, the people behind the companies.
You sound very professional right there. Talk about that, which is good because it's a lot of your expertise. I know you then ended your PR career when you retired, when you were 68. And now we want to talk about your career, how you work up and created the famous award. And I want to dive into another important aspect of your life, relationship. I want to go back to your sons. So you had your sons when you were 40.
That was the result of a one-night stand. I was 40 and I thought I'll never be pregnant again. Yeah, go ahead. I didn't know it was a son at that stage. It was a baby.
How would you describe your son, or any story you would like to share?
My son is a delightful young man. He's 35 now. My daughter is like his younger mother because they're 16 years apart. He went to French school when he was 2 years old, where he suddenly was immersed in the French language, poor thing. He didn't know what had happened to him. By the time he was 9, he spoke French absolutely fluently without an accent, but he hated it. absolutely hated it. And I sent him to the same boarding school that my daughter had gone to as a prep school, which was a beautiful prep school. And then he went on to Cranbrook in Kent, which is a grammar school. It's one of the only remaining boarding grammar schools in England. And he didn't enjoy that at all. But he sent himself to, when he left school after A-levels, he sent himself to carpentry school in North London. And he found out all about the grants he could get, and the builders merchants paid for him to go. And he did an HND in carpentry and became a very good, fine woodworker. And he now works in property development for one of the biggest property companies on commercial buildings in London. So I'm very proud of him. He has a great sense of humour. He's very loving and very funny, and I enjoy his company.
Oh, how would you describe your daughter?
My daughter is hugely successful, so I'm incredibly proud of her because she was dyslexic as a child. Because of the upbringing in Greece as well, she started behind other children here who had maybe had a year of nursery school or 2 years of nursery school before. And she's now at the top of her profession in film. She was an enchanting child, very delicate, very slim, very tiny, and very amusing, always amusing, like my son, who's a great sense of humour. And I just remember when she was very young and I was potty training her, and she was sitting in her, she was sitting on the loo in her nightie. She said, "God up my nightie," rather than God Almighty. I keep reminding her about that. She's a charming little girl.
Oh, we touched base on your career, your relationship with your children, and now we're moving on to understanding more about your elderhood. I understand that in 2005, it was a very roller coaster year for you. What happened and how did you handle that year?
Well, in 2004, we were in South Africa at Christmas. It was during the tsunami, and on the day of the tsunami, I found some lumps in my breast and diagnosed in South Africa almost immediately as breast cancer, which was quite shocking. I had 3 lumps, and we were attacked in South Africa as well by knife, and my son-in-law was chased by one of the robbers with the knife, and they tried to take the baby, who was Bay, in the pram. They caught the robbers on the same day. They were just 2 young boys, but it was very frightening. And I'm not sure whether it's as a result of that or not, but my son-in-law was diagnosed with cancer that year in 2005. My lover, who was a man who was married, but he was older than me, and I'd known him since my 20s, but I'd fallen in love with him the previous year. He had a massive stroke and he died. My son-in-law died and my mother died. And it was all within a 12-month period. So yes, it was one tragedy after another just hitting us.
Then how did you deal with it that year with so many close ones?
Yes, with difficulty, because I was still working, I was still running my own business. I still had my son to care for because he was a teenager. But you get through life. If you have to, you do. You just survive it.
And how did the breast cancer go with you?
That was fine. I had a couple of operations. I had radiotherapy. I refused to have chemotherapy. Touch wood, been almost 20 years now. It's 19 years, and I'm all clear.
Oh, good. That's good. When did you have an aha moment? Oh, I'm into my elderhood. I'm no longer an adult.
Definitely at my 60th birthday. I thought 60, 50, when you look back at your 50s, when you're 60, you think that's a young woman. When you're in 50s, you think you're middle-aged, you're, getting on to being old. But when you're in your 60s, you realise that 50 was young, and 60 is definitely, you can no longer say you're middle-aged. You are definitely the beginning of an old person. So yes, at my 60th birthday.
After you retire from PR, what did you start doing and what kept you moving?
I'm not 100% sure of the sequence of events, but I took a course of teaching yoga, which I did over 3 months. Every weekend for 3 months, we took lessons and practice. So I became a yoga teacher in 2014. So I was still doing PR then. And in 2016, I signed up for a degree course at university in creative writing, which I did in the evenings over 4 years. So I graduated in 2020 with a first class degree. I took up dog walking as well. And I have been an Airbnb host since 2014. I've got 2 studios that I rent out. I always have people staying in the studios. So yes, I've got 3 jobs really.
Oh, so you sound more busy than I am. You have been keeping yourself active. And how do you keep yourself in good spirit and good health now?
I love gardening and I will spend as much time outside as I possibly can. I bike to the swimming pool nearly every day, which is a local swimming pool, and I'll swim very fast for 20 minutes or so. I walk the dogs maybe up to 2 hours a day, maybe not at the weekends, but during the working week. I practice yoga, I teach twice a week, and I take 1 lesson of yoga a week. I sometimes do Pilates, which I know you love. I'm not very good at Pilates, and I had injured my shoulder, so I had to stop on the equipment because of my arms. Yeah, and swimming, walking, gardening, biking. Been on quite a few treks, major treks. 1 in China, 1 in Vietnam. I did Machu Picchu.
Wow.
Traveling, I love traveling.
How have your relationship evolved in your life now that you are coming into your elderhood?
I think I'm much more, I've always been independent. My relationships are really only with my family and friends, obviously, but my friends, I've become far more selective about friendships. I don't want to waste my time on people who bore me or you don't have the same interests as me. So I spend less time with people who are not in the family and more time with a very small circle of friends.
I see. As we come on toward the end part of the recording, I always like to say beyondhood is where we go beyond elderhood. So I want to go deeper with you by looking beyond your elderhood. What has been your biggest success in life looking back? And what are you most proud of?
Being independent and self-sufficient, that I have not relied on anybody else for financial support or support, that I've managed to do it on my own. And that might well be as a result of my childhood, where we were made to be independent because having our parents abroad. So I definitely feel that I deserve acknowledgement for that.
Yes, this is a very good way of describing it because you have been supporting yourself since you were 17.
Yes.
And that's been a long way to come. And what has been your biggest challenge in life, you looking back?
Bringing up the children on my own. I think that's a big challenge. Or just whether it's on my own or with somebody, which it wasn't, but bringing up children who then you become proud of as people. And like as people and admire as people rather than spoiling them. Or I taught both my children to be very self-sufficient as well. And neither of them rely on me in any shape. In fact, my daughter is very supportive now because she's in a position to be. I think bringing up the children was the biggest challenge.
It's not easy to bring up children nowadays. Favorite stage of life, and why is that?
I think in my 50s, despite the tragedies and that terrible year, I felt very confident. I was pretty successful. I looked quite good. I was at my best physically. I think definitely my 50s.
Coming through question I always ask is that, what do you think of death? Do you believe in an afterlife?
I try not to think about death. I don't believe in an afterlife, and I hope that I'm not reincarnated as anything, because I'll probably come back as a lizard or an ant or something horrible. I think it just ends.
Do you have any regret in life, and what it is?
Yes, I didn't value my self-worth. I didn't have enough self-respect to say no, maybe to men for a start, to say I'm better than that, or I deserve more respect. And that's the advice I would give to other people too, is to value your own worth and to have self-respect. I think I lacked that.
This is the advice you would give and share with the younger generation.
Yes, definitely. Value yourself. Value what you have to give.
Finally, what do you look forward to? And we mentioned about traveling before. And what is next for you?
Greece, and we're going to a Greek island in August with my daughter and my granddaughter, who's a real beauty, and a friend of my daughter and my granddaughter's boyfriend. I'm looking forward to the summer, to the sunshine. I'm looking forward to being out in the garden, to seeing my good friends Donald and Claudio, and eating al fresco, swimming outdoors.
Is there any next project that you're looking forward to do now?
Probably going to do a friend's garden. I've just designed my daughter's garden and I upkeep that, which is why the house is so full of flowers, because she sends me flowers every 2 weeks as a thank you for doing her garden rather than paying me. So I do her garden, and a friend I had over last night has asked me to do her garden. So yeah, that's another project.
So your next project could be new gardening. You could be a new gardener.
I did take a gardening course recently online, and I also learnt to play bridge 5 years ago. So I play bridge with friends once a week.
Well, that's come to an end of our episode. Thank you, Liz.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. Before you leave, if you love this episode, please stay tuned for our next one. If you haven't done so, please follow Beyondhood in your favorite podcast listening app. Or you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you found this conversation inspirational or interesting or valuable, chances are you did, since you're still listening. Would you do me a personal favor, a 6-second favor? Share it on your social, email, or tell a friend. Tell a person you know who can benefit from this conversation, who you think would be inspired by our Beyonder, who is navigating how to age with grace and motivation so that they can join and be part of our mission. You guys can discuss. When a podcast becomes a chat becomes an action. Then we're closer to create an intergenerational community through one chat at a time. Lastly, if you love this episode, please support by being a member of the podcast so that I can keep looking for new Beyonder and continue the show.
Childhood, adolescent, adulthood, and elder.